Hey everyone, welcome back to more Homeowner Association stories. In this video, I was living quietly in the forest until the HOA police showed up. Noyok, a neighboring community attempted to push me around using intimidation, blocking my gate, and threatening to have me arrested on my own property. But what they didn't realize was that I was completely prepared for them. And the HOA Reddit title story begins like this. Ever since childhood, I've been drawn to the idea of living somewhere surrounded by nature. I always had this romantic vision of a place filled with trees and open grass, just distant enough from other people to enjoy some peace and quiet, yet close enough that I wouldn't feel completely isolated. That dream was definitely shaped by my grandparents. They used to live on a small farmstead surrounded by open plains and patches of woodland. Whenever my parents and I had the opportunity, we'd go visit them for a few days, and even longer around the holidays. Though I was born and raised in the city, I genuinely loved being out there with them. I enjoyed my grandparents' company, obviously, but I also loved interacting with the animals and spending time outdoors in nature. There was something deeply calming and serene about all of it. It was a stark contrast to city life, and that was exactly what I treasured about it. My grandma would teach me about plants. Since they grew vegetables on the farm, she introduced me to agriculture, when to plant certain crops, and what specific conditions different crops required. She also kept a traditional flower garden, full of roses and tulips and the like. I learned how to tend to those as well. My grandfather would take me out fishing and camping. There was a lake about an hour away, and we'd often spend hours fishing there before setting up camp for the night. One of my most cherished memories is sitting with my grandpa around the campfire on the farm, singing songs while making esmores. They also kept animals, nothing large like cows, but smaller, more manageable ones like goats and chickens. They taught me how to care for them and how to read an animal's mood just by observing it. All in all, I spent a great deal of time with my grandparents, and that experience gave me a deep love and appreciation for the natural world. As I got older, visits became less frequent, but my connection to nature never faded. I always knew that eventually I wanted to live surrounded by it. So I saved up and used part of my inheritance from my grandfather, who sadly passed away a few years back, to purchase a small cabin in a forested area. I like to think I did it both for myself and as a tribute to my grandparents. My grandmother has come to visit a couple of times and absolutely adored the place. I'm fortunate enough to have a remote job, so the cabin serves as my full-time home. As idyllic as it sounds, though, I'm not completely in the middle of the wilderness. As much as I love nature, I'm thoroughly convinced that something is out there, and I have zero interest in being the one to discover what. So yes, I do have neighbors. There are a few cities and towns maybe an hour or two away, and down the hill there's a small community. At the time, I hadn't really looked into that community much or interacted with anyone there. I only ever passed through on my way back from the city. All I really knew was that it was generally a safe area and that it operated under an HOA. That didn't particularly concern me, though. I mean, why would it? I just wanted to know what communities were nearby in case something came up. Rural areas can get a little unsettling at times, so it's better to be informed. I had been living there for 2 years without a single problem, until this year when I began receiving messages from that community's HOA. The mail started arriving a few months ago, which baffled me since I knew I had no connection to that HOA. I had never belonged to a homeowners association before, so I didn't have any particularly negative history with them outside of this situation. And honestly, I had no desire to join one. Property taxes were already steep enough without also paying monthly dues to an HOA. I had specifically asked the real estate agent about this beforehand since I'd researched the area, and they confirmed the cabin fell outside the HOA's jurisdiction. The property deed also made it clear there was no affiliation. So the first few times the letter showed up, I didn't bother reading them, assuming they'd been misdirected. But after a few more arrived, I started reading them, and they were mostly about missed dues payments or not showing up to mandatory meetings. I still figured it was some kind of administrative error. But when I actually looked at the envelopes, my name and address were printed correctly every single time. I still thought it was a mistake. Maybe they had me in their system by accident. But I figure I should reach out to clarify. Just as I was about to contact them, however, their patrol officers showed up at my door. The first visit caught me completely off guard. I was relaxing in my living room when the doorbell rang, which was strange in itself since I rarely have visitors, and anyone who does come usually gives me at least a week's notice. I looked through the peephole and spotted two uniformed men outside. My first instinct was that they were cops, but there were no flashing lights, and their vehicles looked like regular cars rather than police cruisers. Their uniforms weren't fully visible through the peephole, so I couldn't say for certain. I was tempted to just ignore them, but when they rang the doorbell a second time, I decided to open up and see what they wanted. They explained they'd been sent by the HOA to deliver a formal warning about my missed payments and failure to attend mandatory meetings. For a moment, I was relieved, thinking I could simply explain that there'd been some kind of mix-up, but I couldn't have been more wrong. The moment I told them I had no involvement with the HOA, they became incredibly stubborn and verbally aggressive. They insisted without question that I was a member and accused me of making up excuses to dodge accountability. I told them that wasn't the case and that they were being unreasonable by refusing to hear me out. We went back and forth for a while before they finally gave up and left. That wasn't the end of it, though. The letters kept coming, growing increasingly passive-aggressive in tone. Then a few weeks later, the HOA president herself arrived at my door, flanked by those same two uniformed officers, looking every bit as smug and self-important as you'd expect. I also noticed their uniforms were labeled HOA Officer and HOA Patrol. Despite how irritated I was by everything, I tried to greet her with politeness and asked what had brought her here. She introduced herself as Karen, the HOA president, claiming she just wanted to check in. For some reason, whatever politeness I'd intended went right out the window the moment she opened her mouth. So instead, out came my true feelings. "Oh," I said, "so you're the one who's been sending me all those annoying letters." That shifted her demeanor pretty quickly, but honestly, I didn't care. I could see her pleasantness was all an act anyway. She replied quite proudly that she was indeed the one sending them, and informed me I had no right to speak to her that way because she was the president and I was expected to do as she said. I told her I wasn't going to apologize for being fed up with being harassed by her letters and her patrol officers, and I repeated what I'd already told them, that I was not a member of the HOA and the harassment needed to stop. Karen informed me that I had no authority to tell her what to do and that as president, she could act however she pleased. She maintained that my property was under the HOA's jurisdiction. By the way, if an entitled Karen like that had shown up at your door, what would you have done in Opie's position? That truly sounds like a nightmare scenario. And while you're at it, feel free to drop some star emojis in the comments. It really does help me out tremendously. So I challenged her and asked her to show me any documentation stating my cabin was under the HOA's authority, telling her flat out that I'd join the HOA in a heartbeat if she could actually prove it. Of course, Karen couldn't produce anything. Before leaving, she delivered what she called a final warning. If I continued ignoring her, she would be forced to take drastic measures. From that point on, her officers stepped up their harassment. I don't leave the cabin frequently, but I do head out for groceries or to visit family occasionally. One morning, I left early to run into town for supplies, and when I returned, I found the officers parked right by my front gate waiting for me. I tried to get back inside without engaging them, but they physically blocked my path. It was maddening, and it took every ounce of self-control I had not to escalate things. Only after I threatened to call the police did they finally back off. At that point, I had completely had enough. I reached out to my attorney. And by the way, if you had a group of HOA officers essentially pretending to be law enforcement and repeatedly trespassing on your property, what would you do? Let me know in the comments. My attorney and I went through all the documentation, my property records, and the HOA's own policies, and concluded definitively that the HOA had no jurisdiction over me and no right to harass me, given that my property was explicitly excluded from their community. We decided to pursue a cease and desist order to put a stop to it. Armed with that, I already felt much more in control of the situation. Just to be thorough, I also asked my attorney whether the HOA officers had any legitimate authority to arrest me. She said they absolutely did not, They weren't actual law enforcement and were most likely just hired individuals tasked with pressuring people and collecting money for the HOA. Honestly, it sounded more like a mafia operation to me. Good thing I asked, too, because of course those officers came back again. It happened around nighttime, which made the whole thing more unnerving. They were far more aggressive than any previous visit. Right from the start, they were pounding on my door, shouting and demanding I open up. I cracked it open just long enough to tell them to get off my property, fully expecting their usual routine. I shut the door, but that did nothing to deter them. I'm not sure what had gotten into them that night, but they were shouting threats to arrest me if I didn't comply and actually started pulling at the door, trying to force it open. It was obvious they weren't going to back down. They seemed genuinely intent on terrorizing me or forcing their way inside. That was the last straw. I took matters into my own hands. I grabbed my shotgun off the wall and opened the door. I didn't aim it at them. I simply held it as I told them they needed to leave my property immediately or I would be forced to take drastic measures, deliberately echoing their own language back at them. I was well aware they weren't real law enforcement, which meant they couldn't arrest me or do much beyond getting physical. And they obviously weren't going to try that with a shotgun in the picture. The moment they saw it, they immediately apologized, which genuinely surprised me, and they left. And honestly, I'm amazed that turned out to be the most effective way to get an apology from an HOA. Maybe Opie unlocked some kind of secret achievement. Either way, after that night, they never returned. I finished drafting my cease and desist letter and sent it off to the HOA. I also filed a report with the police since the harassment had gone on for months and had crossed the line into near physical violence, especially with that last incident. I made clear I wasn't seeking to have anyone charged or arrested. I simply wanted it to stop. The police agreed and said they'd send the sheriff over to speak with them. Since then, the HOA has not contacted me once. Not a single officer, not a single piece of mail. No apology either, but as long as they leave me alone, I genuinely don't mind. Looking back, I'm still not entirely sure why they were so fixated on bringing me under their control. My best guess is they saw me as easy money and thought I'd just roll over. Too bad for them. It was still a strange situation. Nothing like this had happened in the 2 years prior. Maybe greed got the better of them, or maybe new board members came and wanted to test just how far they could push their authority. Either way, I'm glad it's behind me now. Honestly, throughout the whole ordeal, I seriously considered moving somewhere else, just because of how draining and stressful everything had become. The last thing I wanted was to live in such a hostile environment, especially next to a community that seemed determined to make my life difficult. But then again, I put my hard-earned money, and in many ways a piece of my grandparents, into this place. They'd have a real fight on their hands if they thought their petty schemes were enough to drive me out. And the next one is a truly unique malicious compliance story titled, "I cannot get a refund on my escape room." Okay, let me reschedule then. So this might be unusual for this sub, since I'm actually the one on the receiving end of the malicious compliance rather than the one dishing it out. But I had to respect it and felt it was absolutely worth sharing here. For context, I own an escape room company in a town that borders a fairly touristy area and sits close to an airport. Because of that, we get a lot of bookings from people across the UK visiting for the weekend or international travelers fitting in an escape room on their way through. We only accept online bookings and don't allow walk-ins, so the venue is really only staffed when bookings are scheduled. Our cancellation policy is simple. Full refunds are only available if the cancellation happens more than 24 hours before the scheduled start time. If a cancellation comes in between 2 and 24 hours before the booking, we can only offer a reschedule. It's worth noting that on weekdays, we're generally quite flexible with the policy as long as it doesn't create significant problems. Typically, I'm the one hosting those sessions, so there aren't many added costs like staff wages or lost bookings from other customers. The one day where the policy is strictly enforced is Saturday, when we're almost always fully booked from morning to night with paid staff on site. Any canceled slots on a Saturday would almost certainly have been filled by other customers, and we're still paying our staff regardless. That said, we've only had to enforce the policy a handful of times, as we're usually able to accommodate groups in one way or another. Now, on to the malicious compliance. I received a call earlier today from a gentleman with a thick Scottish accent whose group had been rescheduled to come in about 2.5 hours from the time of the call. He explained that they were running behind due to other activities and asked whether they could be moved to a later slot. I checked our schedule, but had no remaining availability anywhere that day. He then requested a refund, explaining that his group was heading back to Glasgow that evening and had no idea when they'd next be in the area. I outlined our policy and explained that the system only permits reschedules within that window, not refunds, and that given it was a Saturday with staff already in place and the slot already accounted for, a refund simply wasn't possible. A reschedule also didn't make sense for them since they wouldn't be around again anytime soon. After a brief pause, he asked if there were any open slots the following month. I checked the system and offered to move the booking to the same time on November 16th, to which he replied, "Yeah, I think that works." I updated the booking and let him know he'd receive a confirmation email with a new time. He replied, "Great. So the booking is more than 24 hours away now, right?" Me, "Yeah, it's booked in for 4 weeks from today." Him, right? "So the booking is more than 24 hours away. I won't be able to make it. Can I have a refund?" I paused for a moment, processing what had just happened, and then it clicked. He'd found a loophole in the system. Technically, his booking was now more than 24 hours away, which technically entitled him to a full refund. I burst out laughing, congratulated him on beating the system, and processed his refund. Edit: I didn't expect this to get so much attention, but I might as well clear up a few things from the comments. First, as I mentioned, these situations are extremely rare, and it's never been frequent enough to become a real issue. Most groups are happy to simply reschedule, and we genuinely try to accommodate everyone as best we can. If it ever becomes more common, we'll revisit the policy. But in the 2 years we've been open, I can count on one hand the number of times it's actually happened. Second, this is a well-known type of malicious compliance that shows up frequently with hotels, doctors' offices, and similar businesses. That's exactly why I recognized it immediately and knew it belonged here. Third, what I posted was obviously just the stripped-down version of the conversation. There was actually quite a bit of friendly back and forth, which is part of why I didn't mind issuing the refund. He came across as a genuinely good guy. It goes to show that being pleasant and reasonable can go a long way when asking for rules to be bent. And chances are, the next time he's in the area, he'll make another booking based on how this interaction went. That's also why I didn't feel he was being cheeky for canceling right after rescheduling. Oh, and yes, people really do visit escape rooms on the way to the airport. It's apparently a fun way to squeeze a little extra entertainment into the tail end of a holiday. And now, let's move on to the next story. It goes like this. This story comes from our /legal advice. So I, a 38-year-old male, own a small organic grocery store called Fresh and Local Market in downtown XYZ. We've been up and running for about 4 years now, and things have been going really well. We work directly with local farmers, maintain a rooftop garden where we grow some of our own produce, and host weekly cooking classes. The community has been incredibly supportive, and we've built up a dedicated, loyal customer base. The problem is my neighbor Karen, mid-50s, who owns business XYZ, one of those struggling, overpriced grocery stores about 3 blocks away. She's been making my life difficult ever since I opened, insisting that I'm poaching her customers. I understand that competition can be hard, but I'm just trying to run my business. Her store, honestly, isn't doing well. The produce is frequently wilted, the shelves are a mess, and the prices are actually higher than ours for noticeably lower quality items. This morning, I arrived at 6 a.m. to prepare for our morning delivery and found a massive semi-truck completely blocking both our main entrance and loading dock. No company markings, no delivery notice, nothing. It had been deliberately positioned to make it impossible for customers to enter or for our produce delivery to reach us. I recognized it immediately as one of Karen's delivery trucks. She keeps a small fleet for her store. I tried calling her multiple times with no response. Eventually, I walked over to her store to confront her directly. The exchange went roughly like this. Me, Karen, you need to move your truck right now. You're illegally blocking my business. Karen, with a smug smile. Oh, am I? Funny, Because I don't see any no parking signs. Maybe if you weren't stealing all my customers, I wouldn't need to park there. Me? This isn't a game. You're blocking my deliveries and stopping customers from accessing my store. I'm going to have to call the police and arrange a tow. Karen, go ahead. My brother-in-law's on the city council. Nothing will come of it. Maybe this will teach you to stop undermining established businesses in this town. I photographed and recorded everything. The truck's position, my conversation with Karen, and timestamps of all my attempted calls to her. I'd already lost the morning's fresh produce delivery. They had to turn back to the farm. Several customers had also turned away because they couldn't find parking. What are my legal options here? I know I can call a towing company, but I want to make sure I'm covering all my bases. She's cost me thousands in lost business just today, and I'm concerned she'll try something like this again if I don't address it properly. And yeah, if you have any advice for OP, let me know what you do in his position. I am genuinely curious. Either way, here's what the comments had to say. One commenter said, "Former property manager here. Call the police non-emergency line and a towing company immediately. The truck is illegally blocking access to your business and loading dock. Take photos of everything and document all losses, turned away deliveries, customers who couldn't get in, etc. Save any security camera footage you have. You'll want all of this for both insurance claims and potential legal action." Comment number 2 said, "LOL, just slash her tires. That'll teach her." And well, while that would certainly send a message, it would also expose OP to some very real legal trouble. Comment number 3, NL, not a lawyer, but a business owner. File a police report immediately. What she's doing could constitute tortious interference with business relations. Document everything, all losses, customer complaints, delivery disruptions, and keep any future communication with her in writing. You may have a strong civil case here. Comment number 4, from experience in city planning. Most jurisdictions have specific regulations about blocking loading docks. Check your local ordinances. And if she openly admitted to intentionally blocking your business, that's a completely different legal matter than just illegal parking. Comment number 5, bro, just tow it. Why are you even asking Reddit? And honestly, fair point. Comment number 6, lawyer here. Call the police, file a report, have it legally towed through a licensed company, document all your losses, and send her a certified cease and desist letter demanding she stop this behavior immediately. Also look into filing for a temporary restraining order if this is part of an ongoing pattern of harassment. This isn't just about today. You're building a paper trail for what could become a much larger legal matter. Comment number 7. Have you tried contacting her corporate headquarters? They might want to know how their franchise owner is conducting herself. Then the original poster updated. Thanks for all the advice. I called the police non-emergency line and a towing company. While waiting, I documented everything and started calculating my losses. The police arrived first and confirmed the truck was illegally parked and obstructing a business entrance and loading dock. Here's where things get interesting. Karen showed up just as the tow truck was getting into position. She started screaming that she'd sue everyone involved. The officer, bless him, calmly explained that she was in violation of multiple ordinances and could either move the truck herself or have it towed at her expense. She refused, claiming she'd lost the keys. The officer wasn't buying it and authorized the tow anyway. The whole time, Karen was filming on her phone and threatening to call her lawyer. But now she's escalating further. She's posted negative reviews about my store online, and I've heard from other business owners that she's trying to organize a boycott. She's also parked her personal vehicle in front of my store twice today, technically in legal spots, and has been photographing customers going in. Should I pursue legal action beyond the towing incident? She's now actively working to damage my store's reputation. I've saved screenshots of everything. Response. By the way, she's now crossed from simple interference into harassment and potential defamation. Save every screenshot and start keeping a detailed log of every single incident. Second comment. Business lawyer here. What she's doing now is actually legally worse than the truck incident. She's establishing a clear pattern of intentional interference with your business. Save all evidence of her attempted boycott and false reviews. If you have security footage of her photographing your customers, preserve that too, It could be interpreted as customer harassment. Third comment, sounds like someone needs a restraining order. Fourth comment, the fact that she's doubling down after police involvement is a red flag. Consider having a lawyer send a formal cease and desist. The letter alone may not carry legal weight, but it signals you're serious and creates a documented record. Update number 2. Thanks again for all the advice. It's been 3 weeks, and I wanted to let everyone know how this played out. Following your suggestions, I hired a business attorney who specializes in commercial disputes. They sent a formal cease and desist letter addressing both the harassment and the false reviews. I filed for a temporary restraining order based on the pattern of behavior and kept meticulous records of every interaction and every loss. The cease and desist letter really got her attention, especially once my lawyer included documentation of all her actions and the potential legal consequences, along with an itemized breakdown of damages from the truck incident. Lost deliveries, customer receipts from the same day, the week prior showing lost revenue, and so on. But Karen chose to ignore the letter. Not only that, she doubled down, telling people I was threatening her, and even called the health department to trigger a surprise inspection. We passed with flying colors. Our rooftop garden actually impressed the inspector. Then karma stepped in. Remember that city council brother-in-law she bragged about? Turns out he's no longer on the council. The current members were very interested to learn that a local business owner had been using semi-trucks to deliberately block competitors. After multiple complaints came in, the city launched an investigation, and it turned out we weren't the only business she targeted. We were just the most recent. They launched a compliance review of her store, and suddenly Karen had far bigger problems than my thriving business. Her store had multiple violations requiring costly repairs. The final blow came when she tried to claim in her online post that our produce was unsafe and illegally sourced. My lawyer identified this as textbook defamation per se, a direct, provably false attack on our business practices. We filed a defamation lawsuit. Karen finally cracked when her own corporate headquarters caught wind of everything, thanks to the commenter who suggested contacting them. They were not pleased about the liability, exposure, and potential bad press. They gave her an ultimatum: sell the franchise voluntarily, or they'd terminate her contract. She is now selling her store to a new franchisee. The incoming owners seem far more professional and have already reached out to discuss how we can operate as good neighbors. They plan to focus on bulk and conventional groceries, leaving our niche in organic and local produce entirely to us. As for the legal side, we settled out of court. The terms are confidential, but let's just say the settlement covered all our losses and legal fees. She was also required to publish a formal retraction of her false statements and remove all the negative reviews. The best part? Our business is doing better than ever. The community really rallied around us throughout all of this, and we've picked up quite a few new loyal customers in the process. We're even expanding the rooftop garden and adding more cooking classes to keep up with demand. Thanks again for all the advice. Sometimes standing up to bullies really does pay off in the end. And the final one is a satisfying little petty revenge story titled, "Roommate was stealing my marked leftovers. Made a chocolate cake with habanero peppers, labeled it with my name, and wrecked his world. So my old college roommate had no idea how to cook, never did dishes, and rarely went grocery shopping. This led to him regularly eating my food, especially my leftovers, since those were already prepared meals. I used my leftovers for weekly meal prep and had explicitly asked him to stop, explaining that it was both costly and deeply inconvenient. Unfortunately, the behavior didn't stop. If anything, he seemed to be eating even more of my food out of spite. To teach him a lesson, I baked a chocolate cake infused with habanero peppers and made a frosting mixed with wasabi. I labeled it clearly with my name and a bold "Do not eat" warning, then waited. My roommate has an extremely low tolerance for spicy food, so I fully expected him to take one bite and immediately regret it. About 2 days later, while I was at work, he and a couple of his friends got thoroughly drunk and decided to raid my food. Somehow, they managed to eat through about a third of the cake before it hit them. When the inevitable wave of nausea from the combination of heavy drinking and extremely spicy food kicked in, the cake made its presence known a second time on the way back up. And I can only imagine it wasn't a pleasant experience on the way out either, though I can't say for certain. When he asked me why I'd made such a monstrosity, I told him I'd simply come across a chocolate habanero recipe online and wanted to give it a try. After that, he never touched my cooking again. And yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.